so back again with another feature card buddy fight deck profile. So this time we've got my Prism Dragon budget deck profile, which I just finished about a week ago. So let's get this started. But before we do, I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and donate to my Patreon. Now let's get started. First up, the flag is obviously going to be Star Dragon World, since I'm running Prism Dragons, and the buddy today is going to be Radiant Crystal Dragon Athora. Size 3, 7,000 power, 7,000 defense, a critical of 2. Call cost, put the top card of your deck into its soul and pay 2 gauge. And if this card is on your center, it cannot be destroyed by effects during your opponent's turn. It has double attack and soul guard. So this card is not useful. But the reason why it's here is because I refuse to pay more than $10 just to get one more copy of a card that, yes, is important in the deck. But considering I already have 4 copies, I'm not willing to waste another $10 just to make it the buddy when I already have this at 5 copies. So I'm not going to spend $50 trying to get one card. Oh, he also has double attack and soul guard. First off, our only monster that isn't a size 3 in this deck, Mixed Crystal Dragon Baldwin. Size 2, 1 copy, 6,000 power, 5,000 defense, critical of 2. You are never going to call this thing, and if you do, your hand is shit. Put this card from your hand into the soul of a Prism Dragon item on your field, and the Prism Dragon item with this card in its soul gets plus 6k power, soul guard. It can attack even if you have a monster in the center. That is the only reason why it's here, because it powers up an item, it gives it defenses, so if your opponent tries to blow it up, it's harder to blow it up, and it can attack, which means you can, since both items have 0 crit, you effectively you don't have to waste an Athora critical on one attack. You can just beat the shit out of your opponent with the item, which is useful. So 1 copy, I guess. 1 copy of Yellow Crystal Dragon Lamiere, 7,000 defense, 7,000 power, critical of 3, size 3. Call cost, put the top card of your deck into its soul and pay 1 gauge. It just has soul guard. This is only here because because the deck sometimes has a gauge problem. It occasionally has a gauge problem. So having a card that only costs 1 gauge to call and it still gets soul guard is really helpful. So even though he has no ability and he's basically just the heaviest critical guy we got, he is here just in case I only have 1 gauge. So 1 copy. 2 copies of Chaos Calvados. 7k power, 6k defense, critical of 2, size 3. Call cost, put the top card of your deck into its soul and pay 1 gauge. When a monster on your center is attacked, for this turn, nullify the penetrate of the attacking card. So this thing doesn't have, it also has soul guard. This thing doesn't have to be on the center to nullify the penetrate, but more likely than not, it's going to be on the center. If it's not, I'm questioning what rules are you playing with, considering that you would have to have this means you would have to be breaking the size rule. I guess this thing could be used in Chaos, but here, no, you'd be breaking the size rule a lot. But it's useful, he nullifies penetrate. This deck doesn't really want to take damage. Pretty much like pretty much like Kanata does in the anime, the no damage fighter, where you freeze to take damage no matter what. That's pretty much what this card is for. You don't want to take penetrate damage, you just want to wall up your center and keep your life points at high. So if your opponent gets past your center and can beat the shit out of you, you have high life points, so it's really unlikely that they're going to kill you in that one turn. 4 copies of Black Crystal Dragon Lucian Black. 5k power, 5k defense, critical of 2, size 3. When it enters the field, gain 2 gauge, and no other effect. But this is only here because, in the off chance that I have, because the items both cost a gauge each, and Athora, the one you want to bring out, is 3 gauge, which means at the start you cannot bring out both of them. If you have Lucian Black, what I just do is I call it to the center, skill, charge 2 gauge, and then I call the Athora over it, and then you basically can have all your stuff out on the field on the very first turn. Really useful card, gets the extra gauge, benefits the deck so much. 4 copies, even if you're not going to use it any other way. Next up is 4 copies of our buddy, Radiant Crystal Dragon Athora. I already explained what he did. If you want to go back and look what he does, just go to the beginning of the video. Now onto the Ace Athora, the one you actually want to call. Heavenly Crystal Dragon of Sunlight, Aldo Athora! 4 copies, 10k power, 10k defense, critical of 2, literally the strongest and the most defensive monster I have in this deck. Call cost, pay 3 gauge and put the top 2 cards of your deck into its soul. So really thick on the soul, really defensive, makes it even harder to kill because you have to kill it 3 times. This card on the field cannot be destroyed by card effects, and you cannot take damage by card effects. So your opponent can't do, so if they couldn't get past this, they can't even burn you out, which is really helpful. If they're trying to destroy it by effects, they can't, which means they just have to ram into it and try to get over its 10,000 defense. And then the ability I mostly run it for, Overturn. Once per game ability, it cannot be countered. During your opponent's turn, drop a hand card. For this turn, all Prism Dragons on your field cannot be destroyed or leave the field by your opponent's card effect, so basically they're stuck on there forever for the turn, and they get plus 100,000 defense with double attack and soul guard. So even if they could get over that defense with only one card, Turbulent Warlord Dragon, Borrow Boss, Jaguar Royale, they couldn't deal effect damage, which means effectively this thing's just an immortal wall and it makes your whole field immortal for the one turn you use the overturn on. And this deck gets plenty of hand cards. There will never be a problem with that overturn ability. It has double attack and soul guard, really helpful. Even if they manage to get over the 110k defense, like I said before, they can't deal effect damage, so effectively this might as well end the turn since you're using the overturn. Unless they're going for the impact, in that case you're probably screwed, but who cares. And sorry, some of these images are going to be a little blurry. I just wanted the English version. So 2 copies of Visible Light. So put the top 2 cards of your deck into your gauge, and if you have 8 or more life, you gain another gauge. It's useful. It's not the best, but like in the off chance like you don't have Lucian Black or something that charges gauge, and you need extra gauge to bring out Sunlight in one of the items, then you can use this just to get the gauge. It's really helpful considering it pays for the cost of Heavenly on its own. And I keep saying items a lot because they actually are important depending on which one you have. 2 copies of Hairy Gland. You merely cast this card during an attack on the opponent's turn. Counter. Call a Prism Dragon from your hand by paying its call cost, and for the battle it gets counterattack, and then change the target of the attack to that monster. So pretty much, worst case scenario, if your opponent somehow gets over your center, you cast Hairy Gland, call something from your hand, and then the attack goes to that thing, and if it's a Thora of Heavenly Crystal Light, then they're pretty much screwed because they probably can't get over it. So 2 copies. It's good, but it's not that great because you're not going to lose your center that often. Next up, 2 copies of Dispersion. You merely cast this card if you have a Prism Dragon on your center. Pay 2 gauge, draw 2 cards. Yes, the pay 2 gauge is kind of bad, but it gets you the hand cards, which makes it really easy just not to lose hand. This deck, I'm going to say this. If you ever have a gauge problem, it's either of one of 2 reasons. Well, either you bricked really badly or it's the first turn of the game. If it's the first turn of the game, more likely than not, you're not going to have enough gauge. But once it hits the second turn or later, you're definitely going to have enough gauge for everything. 4 copies of Earth Barrier. You merely cast this card if you're being attacked, nullify the attack, and gain 1 life. This is ran because, extra life is very useful in the off chance that, they could deal you burn damage, or just as an extra nullify, because I run 12 nulls in this deck. So, helpful card, plus it's a free nullify, so why not? 4 copies of Brilliancy Fire. You merely cast this card if a Prism Dragon is on your field. Put the top card of your deck into your gauge and draw a card, and put this card into the soul of a Prism Dragon on your field. You can only cast 1 Brilliancy Fire once per turn. So you can put it into the soul of your item, you can put it into the soul of a Thora, which is what I continuously do. The last game I played with it, it had freaking 6 soul and no one could get over it. It was just a stall game. And if it's in the soul of a Prism Dragon, all monsters on each player's field cannot be returned to hand. So there's no point in bouncing it. If you have Sunlight on the field, there's no point in bouncing it or destroying it by effects. You might as well just ram into it. Or you could just do, Destroyer it and place it into the drop zone, since technically speaking that isn't destroying. So you could try that, but you can do that, but otherwise it's going to be really hard to kill it. 4 copies of Radiant Shell. You merely cast this card if you have a Prism Dragon on your center and is being attacked. Pay a gauge, counter, nullify the attack, and deal your opponent 1 damage. That's useful. It burns your opponent a damage, which means it could bring them closer to impact depth, or it just hurts them for attacking, which is really useful. Plus it's a null, which means it's even harder to get over a Thora. Next up, 4 copies of Methrit Shine. I probably butchered that name. You merely cast a card during attack on the opponent's turn, and if you have a Prism Dragon on your field. Counter, nullify the attack, then put this card into the soul of a size 3 Prism Dragon on your field. If you do, you gain 1 life, and you get to draw 1. And souls of a Prism Dragon with this card in its soul cannot be dropped by your opponent's card effects. So there's no point in trying to get rid of them. The only way you can get rid of them is by attacking into it. And you can also get to draw a card and you gain a life point for just using this. So it's like Earth Barrier, but then you get a free draw to replace this card, which is really better. So 4 copies. Really good. Next up is the items. 4 copies of Crystal Greaves. 0 power, 0 crit, 5k defense. Pay a gauge to equip it. Abilities of all Prism Dragons on your center cannot be nullified, and they get plus 2k power and 2k defense. This ability cannot be nullified. At the beginning of your opponent's final phase, if you have a Prism Dragon on your center, you put the 2 cards from your drop zone into your gauge. So this card is both different and better than the other item. I'll go over why later, but that's pretty good because it strengthens your Prism Dragon, which means if you have Sunlight on the field, it has 12,000 defense, 12,000 power, and a critical of 2. Its abilities cannot be nullified. You can't nullify Crystal Greaves' ability, which means you're stuck there, and then you can get an extra 2 gauge. So if you're already having a gauge problem, you can just fix it by placing your drop zone back into your gauge one by one. Next up is Tormelian Greaves. It would, in my personal opinion, looks cooler than the other one, especially in terms of art. Same stats, 0k power, 0 crit, 5k defense. Equip cost, put up to a total of 2 Prism Dragons or defense from your drop zone into your soul and pay a gauge. You don't have to put 2, but more likely than not you should put 2 just in case. Abilities of all Prism Dragon on your field cannot be nullified. That includes this thing since it is a Prism Dragon. Counteract, during your attack phase, you choose a monster with a Thor in its card name, and you may rest this card. If you do, stand the chosen card, and if you do, burn your opponent 1 damage, Soul Guard. So that's useful. It prevents everything from being nullified, so it's just like Crystal Greaves, but nothing gets strengthened, and yes, it only works towards a Thora, but it gets to deal an extra burn damage, and it has Soul Guard. So it depends on the situation. More likely than not, if you had Baldwin in your hand, you would use it for Greaves instead of this thing. So, but either way, it depends on the situation. Tormelian Greaves, you use it if you have enough. You prefer to have it at all times because you would use it just to punish your opponent at all times and deal them as much damage as physically possible. Like if all the attacks hit with this thing's ability, you would deal 7 damage. And if Crystal Greaves, you would use it like if you have a gauge problem and you get 2 gauge, or like you need that extra power and defense. So either way, both good at 4 copies. And finally, 4 copies of our Impact. Prismatic Soleil Drive Shoot! You may only cast this card during your opponent's final phase. If you do not take damage during their turn, a Prism Dragon Athora and its card name is on your center, and they have 5 life or less. Counter, deal 5 damage to your opponent. This card cannot be nullified. The damage cannot be reduced. If your opponent's life points are dropped to 0 by this, they cannot revive, which means they could lose to this, which is why Radiant Shell is here to burn them out, just in case like they try to keep themselves above 5 and they're at 6 now, they just go back down to 5. So as long as they can't get over Thor, which is going to be really hard to do in this deck, you can just beat the shit out of them with the Impact. If they get past Athora, well, you probably stalled long enough to be able to bring out another one, so there's no point in even trying to stop this. Well, that was the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and donate to the Patreon. And put down in the comments what other decks you want me to build, and I can build them. And don't forget to raise your flag. Can you pull a Buddy Rare card?